We shall begin the proceedings, and I invite Dr. T.D. Singh. He's himself a chemist from the UC Irvine, and he did a lot of work at Georgia. I invite him to deliver the inaugural address. Dr. T.D. Singh.
Not yet, but I thought you had slides. I have both. Oh, I see. I'm getting both. I don't see.
Good morning and namaste to everyone. So I'm going to invoke for about a second so that the proceedings go on very smoothly and very productively. Om Jnanatimirandhasya Jnananjana Salakaya Chakshurunmalitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swamiti Namine Namaste Saraswati Devam Gauravani Pracharine Nirvisesha Sunavadi Pashyati Desatarine Chintamani Prakarasatmashu Kalpa Vriksha Laksha Vritesu Suravira Vipalayantam Lakshmi Sahasrasata Sambhramasya Vyamanam Govindamadi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Govindamadi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Govindamadi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami. Honorable Chairman, distinguished delegates, guests, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the organizing committee for the first international conference on the study of consciousness within science, as well as the Bhaktivedanta Institute, it is my great pleasure and a privilege to welcome you all to the conference and to thank each one of you for being here with us today. The participative response from the intellectual community has been tremendous, and your presence here is a striking testimony to that. We are extremely grateful for this. Throughout the course of organizing this conference, while being propelled by a tiny perception of a grand vision, we often found ourselves limited in terms of our personal capacities. In spite of our best efforts, there may have been many shortcomings. May I therefore request all of your indulgence and forgiveness over any of our errors of commission and omission in being here. The advisory committee for the conference, Professor Henry Stapp, Professor Carl Prabram, Professor Sudarshan, and Professor David Long, and other friends have helped us greatly in many key decisions for the conference organization. All of them have given their valuable time and significant input. We are extremely thankful to all of them. The conference staff and the volunteers have also worked extremely hard to attain to all the necessary details, including housing of many of our delegates who have traveled from far away. We hope you will find your stay and the amenities provided adequate and comfortable. The topic of mind and consciousness has been of perennial interest to mankind. In our own country, India, our earliest writings of metaphysics, starting with the Rig Veda, have extensively dealt with the phenomenon of consciousness, mind and matter. For the modern man also, the study of mind-body or mind-brain interaction continues to remain as a topic of vital and central interest. There have been several conferences and meetings in recent times on the topic of consciousness. Nevertheless, we hope that this conference will serve to open up new frontiers. Traditionally, the study of mind and consciousness has been considered the province of psychology, philosophy, and theology. Since Newton The hard sciences have been limited to studying objective phenomena, phenomena that can be readily measured and quantitatively modeled. These two realms, thus, the subjective domain of the mind and consciousness and the objective domain of external reality, have largely remained separate. The present conference is born of the recognition that many developments in science since the turn of this century, such as in quantum physics, neuroscience, and artificial intelligence, have demonstrated the need to carefully consider the relationship between consciousness and the objective world, a relationship that may entail hitherto unconsidered modes of causal interplay. Indeed, it may even be that an understanding of consciousness is a necessary prerequisite for completing our study and understanding of the purely objective phenomena. The issue of consciousness within science seems to be no longer whether, but how. Hopefully the discussions here will reveal whether consciousness can be studied within the existing scientific tools and methodology. If yes, how, and if no, why not? The distinguished speakers are all eminent scientists from various fields known for their strong interest and the contributions in the study of consciousness. We feel very fortunate to have them in this conference. They include Sir John Eccles, Carl Prevram, Benjamin Levitt, representing neuroscience, and Professor George Wall from biology, Professor Karen Smith from chemistry, Professors Henry Staub, Sudarshan, and Professor Froelich, and Richard Thompson, representing physics, Professor John Searle, David Long, representing philosophy, and Ravi Gomatam, representing artificial intelligence, and Vasily Nalimov, representing mathematical science, and Robert Jan and Brinda Dunn, representing engineering science. These invited speakers have had the benefit of having their ideas critically examined amongst themselves over the last 2 days in the closed workshop sessions. So they will bring to you not only their work, with which you may be familiar, but also with insights and wisdoms gained from their interaction with regard to possibilities and the limitations of their ideas. Different models of the study of consciousness within science will be presented by these different speakers from these various fields. The purpose of this conference is to critically examine these different models from scientific viewpoint. Thus, we have given enough time for discussion so that there will be plenty of interaction between the speaker and the participants. We, the conference organizers, are also very pleased to note the extremely high academic training of all our registered delegates. Our records indicate that 60% of the registrants are PhDs with distinguished academic and research record. I am confident that the discussion sessions that will follow this lecture, as well as the final panel session tomorrow, will be productive. We also have a number of scholars presenting their views in the poster session. I think the poster session will be staged tomorrow. Perhaps I should say something about the word Bhaktivedanta itself. The word is a conjunction of two Sanskrit words, Bhakti and the Vedanta. Bhakti refers to the cultivation of our holistic inner domain, while Vedanta refers to the culmination or the process of the rational intellect. Both words have been familiar to many scientists and scholars of the 20th century. Erwin Schrödinger often drew from the writings of the Upanishads, the principal writings of the Vedanta, and Robert Oppenheimer is famous for his study of the Bhagavad Gita text, the most important Vedantic text delineating bhakti. The word Bhaktivedanta then refers to integration of both the holistic inner and the rational exterior for the good, common good of humankind. Hopefully, that idea is an appropriate backdrop for the topic of our discussion, the study of consciousness within science. So we hope that the deliberations will be extremely productive, and we hope the weather, the cool weather of San Francisco will be Sabha over at the end of this morning session. So now, without taking much of your time, I'd like to once more thank all of you and hand over this to the subsequent proceedings. Thank you very much.
So, I now hand over the session to Professor George Sudarshan. Professor Sudarshan.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, it is a great pleasure and a signal honor for me to be the chairman of the opening session, which happens to contain 3 scientists of impeccable reputation and whom I have admired for a long time. It is with some trepidation that I accept to be the chairman of this one, because every one of the speakers has a lot to tell you, and I would have to be the one to convey the bad news to them that time is up this time. In our deliberations for the last 2 days, we have found that it's a formidable task for experts who are immersed in their own studies to be able to talk across discipline. Not because they don't want to, but because everybody wants to talk and very few people want to listen. But we have been subjected to a considerable amount of cross-fertilization for the last 2 days, and I hope what you hear from the people would contain not only the insights that they have gained in their own work, but also the results of the last 2 days. If I may make use of this opportunity to express the thanks of the delegates, the speakers, and the people who are participants in the workshop for the last 2 days, to the Bhaktivedanta Institute, to its director, Dr. Singh, and Mr. Ravi Gomtam, the secretary, for the excellent arrangements that they have made, and in being able to bring together such a cross-section of scintillating humanity together. Now, somebody said that we have 1,000 points of light, and the problem is to make it into one blazing light. And you will see that, in fact, meticulous attention is going to be employed in bringing together as many things as possible, so that in the coherence of the whole group, we will all become wiser and more insightful. I have great pleasure in inviting Sir John Eccles. Professor Eccles has been identified as Mr. Brain for a long time, and he is going to allow us to pick his brain. Sir John Eccles.
Well, thank you. Now, there's no neck microphone. Please let me know if my voice is not working properly through this machine. I am grateful here for this institute for inviting me to San Francisco to address you on this problem of consciousness within science. Is this all right? Can you hear? It's all right. The architecture of not listening. Go on, let's play. Thank you. Consciousness within science. Now, I'm not going to talk about consciousness. That is this, what is it questions. It's quite fruitless. Every child knows what consciousness is. They know when their cat is conscious and all that sort of thing. You just don't have to define it that way at all. Scientifically, we don't like these what is it questions, but we do like how questions. How, and my problem today is how does consciousness, my conscious experience, act into the world, and how do I receive from the world? How when I want to just, say, lift up this glass of water, I see it, I act, I drink it. I'm carrying out, maybe I'm carrying out various thoughts are being expressed in my movements, and the world around me is being perceived. Now this mind-brain problem, the interaction between mind and brain, has had a very rough philosophical treatment for a long time since Descartes. They want to get rid of it, most people, by saying that the mind world is just identical with the brain world or something like that. They've never given a shred of evidence of this, you know. It's a myth. It's what I call a superstition, this identity theory. But we live with superstitions. The whole world is full of superstitions. You've only got to read science fiction, or a lot of science for that matter. It's all full of superstitions. So I get on with it now. I am going to give you now some new ideas about mind and brain interaction. It is partly in my book here. I've just written, or it's published, Evolution of the Brain, Creation of the Self, out this year. And I'm also, my main talk has just been accepted by the Royal Society of London for publication in Series B. So it's been through the referees and all that sort of thing. It's not, it is authentic. It's not. So, although a lot of people don't like it, of course. Now, all right. Well, now we've had our fun, and we've got to get down and do some work. I'm going to make this very much illustrated with, I think, very good illustrations. Now, that's the trouble I have talking to this thing. All right, next slide, please. First slide. Now, this is a diagram. When it comes, you see, there it is. And we need, can you turn off those lights there? Oh, well, leave them on, I don't mind. Can you see this diagram? All right, that's better. Here is a diagram which has been around for some time on the mind-brain problem. And by the way, there's no mind-body problem. It's all mind-brain problem. So what's happening? I know what I'm doing wrong here. It's all mind-brain problem. And so here is the part of the brain, the liaison brain, the cerebral cortex. It's only cerebral cortex that relates to consciousness, I think. And here is then perception comes this way. Brain actions give you all these perceptions. The brain actions are just impulses, firing of cells and so on. And the perceptions are, of course, in another world, the world of experience, the world of mind. And so there's no color or light or anything like that in the world. But there is only in our perceptions. When they come into the brain and are processed there, they turn into these experiences, which we all know, the same on this side, thoughts, feelings, and so on. So it's a very real problem I'm talking about. I'm talking about intentions here, working on the SMA. When I want to drink that water, I had a thought, I thought about it, and then I went through the motions of acting. So my thoughts do act upon my body and my movements. The idiotic thing is that philosophers don't even seem to know that. They are carrying out this way even into talking philosophy. They think and they express mind-brain problem. And it's the central core. We'll come to that later. So this is the essence of my story. What are these double arrows doing? Now this diagram, this part here, is actually in the brain. But for diagrammatic convenience, I have to draw it above. I can't put it all in here. This drawing of the units, vertical units, which are called dendrons, of the cerebral cortex. And so the arrows here show what I'm talking about today. Arrows going from mind here, mentioned intentions, say, into brain, and also from brain into perceptions. So that's what the talk. What is going on with these arrows, which is in this dualist diagram. Next slide will show you here a real brain drawing in the skull, left hemisphere. And it will show you, is this all, can you still hear? I'm not sure how this might, is that all right? Okay. If you don't answer, then I know you haven't heard the talk. So here is the motor cortex, parts where action gives you movement, and here's reception from the whole body laid out as a strip map, and here's for vision, and here's for hearing, and here's for speech. We have various areas, but a great deal of the brain is not defined here because that belongs to the psychic areas, or the Gnostic areas, as Ferry calls it. But so what we're dealing with, what is going on in the, across this folded cerebral cortex, about 2,500 square centimeters, 3 millimeters thick, and that is the total performance of the brain, which relates directly to consciousness. So next slide, please. And we're going to look at pieces of that brain. Here's an old picture of Ravi Kahal, of the cerebral cortex. Now it's all going to be cerebral cortex, not the rest of the brain. And here is a section of the cerebral cortex by the great master. Here's a pyramidal cell, and this is going to be essentially my story. Pyramidal cells. Over 60% of the cerebral cortex are pyramidal cells, looking like that, with their dendrites going up to the surface, the apical dendrite. There's many collateral branches, and you can see several others. There's another one there. And this is the basic neuronal structure worked out by Ramnikahal last century. Here is a diagram, a bit easier to follow, if you like, and I'm still with pyramidal cells. My story is going to be on pyramidal cells. Here's one here, with its apical dendrite running up here, with its spine synapses. You can see the little knobs here. You can see them there too. Kahal saw them but didn't know what they were. And these are the synapses, like here, are made on those spines, on the apical dendrites, and also on the other dendrites of the cell. It's not just apical. But I'm dealing only with apical dendrites today, the ones that go from here up to the cortex, with many collateral branches, as you can see here. I was going to show you a picture of that, but it's no overhead projector for it. So that is the basic structure, you might say, of the cerebral cortex, diagrammatically shown. And that was what we were satisfied until recently, the basic anatomy. I could write a book on it for now. But that is the pyramidal cells, their receptive apparatus coming in here, synapses, making them fire, the impulses go down the axon and distributed somewhere else. And that's the way in which the brain works. Next slide. Now this is a more, you might say, organized drawing in perspective by St. Agatai, the great Hungarian master. And there you can see pyramidal cells. You see them here. Here's another one, lamina 5. These are the 6 lamina of the cerebral cortex. It's all in 6 lamina. And here are lamina 5 cells, very important for our purpose, going up here with the apical dendrites to the surface, spine synapses all the way. Here is some in lamina 3 there. There's one nicely shown in lamina 3 with its apical dendrites, and you can see the synapses made by fibers all the way on these spines, all the way to the surface. Now, there are quite a lot, about, so that gives the feeling, 10,000 spine synapses on one pyramidal cell, but that would be counting all the basal ones. And for the apical ones and the collateral branches, I'm just using, say, 2,000 spine synapses on any one cell. Well, that was the traditional view until quite recently. Next slide. Next slide, please. And this is by Peterson Kara. What is that light doing there for? It just is damaging my films. That's better. Now you can see it. Isn't that better? Here is a Peterson Kara of Boston. And there are pyramidal cells. You see one here. See their apical dendrites going up to the surface. This is now real size. And here is another one going up. You can see them all going up to the surface and with spine synapses on them. Well, now that was what we'd always believed. But then, because we all looked at things in this kind of section, you didn't notice something special. But you can see that they're tending to get together here. But if you cut it across here and look at the transverse section, then you get an illumination. Because these little open circles are the apical dendrites cut across, and you'll see that they are assembling in clumps. You see, not just scattered uniformly, but bundling. And this turns out to be a fundamental unit of reception for the cerebral cortex. this apical dendrites and all the little collateral branches going up here. Those perhaps 2,000 synapses on each, and that is the input line from all these synaptic input, and it will turn out also from the mental input into the brain, the cerebral cortex. Next slide. And here you see, again, transverse section. You can see the apical dendrites here, the little open circles clumping together. And if you look at the high magnification of one of them, here with an EM, there you can see the apical dendrite cut across. There you can see the spine synapse on it. There you can see the spine on the spine synapses. There's another one there, and so on. So all the way up to the surface, they're just covered with spines with synapses. So that's the basic input into the apical dendritic story of the cerebral cortex. Next slide. Now, if you do Nomarsky optics, you can actually see this bundling coming together. You see there's one there. It goes from lamina 4 here up, and then it fronds and branches up to the lamina 1. There's another bundle there, and you can see these are lamina 3 here, and these pyramidal cells of lamina 3, and you can see their apical dendrites are joining into the bundles. So this is a fundamental bundling found by Fleischauer first in Bonn, and by Peters in Boston. And there's a complete agreement between these two schools of investigation on the very nature of this organization of the apical dendrites of the pyramidal cells, which are over 60% of the cells in the cortex. So this is the biggest, as it were, unit operation in the cortex. Next slide. And so Cordilla Smolka drew this in 1986, this diagram, to show in perspective. It's a drawing now, not your pictures. Here are the pyramidal cells. There are their apical dendrites going up to the surface and coming together to make this bundle. And then the lamina 3 ones are joining in. Could you lower that slightly? Oh, it's probably hard. But you can see, yeah, that's right. You can see 3 of these bundles cut across here. They've gone up there, and they're partly cut across. The little round apical dendrites are shown there. So there are 3 bundles in this, and you can see the way they are coming together as they rise up there to make this unitary performance. So now I'm going to call this unit, which is for reception, made up of dendrites, a dendron. I don't have anything to write with, but I'll spell it, D-E-N-D-R-O-N, dendron. It's made of dendrites, and I use the on because it is a fundamental unit like in physics. And so here is then the unit of the cerebral cortex for reception, not receptive units, which comes in reception, all the synapses here, and eventually we'll see that's where the mind works. It's a reception for that too. So next slide, please. I'm now going to deal with the mind. How does the mind work on the brain? You see, because I'm up against the problem all the time that people with goodwill don't like the idea that mind can work upon the brain. Mind, the mental world, is a world of fuzziness. They will say, what is it? It's just a smog or something, the mind. But that's the world, our world. If your mind's a smog, you're a smog. And that's all it is about. Now you have to realize that your mind is infinitely complex and sharp and subtle and modifiable and recoverable. It is everything we have, is mind. There's a brain in here. I don't know anything about my brain, but I do know a lot about my mind. And this is the problem. How does this come together? And that's what I'm dealing with. So now here is a very subtle way of doing experiments on this due to Ruland of Copenhagen, now Stockholm. You put in, here's the subject, with the cannula inserted in the internal carotid artery to do an angiogram. So it's all ethical. The subject approves of this, agrees to it. And then you inject here radioxenon, a short burst of radioxenon, into the internal carotid artery. It goes through all the vessels here, circulating around in the cerebral cortex. And here you have 254 Geiger counters, a cap over your left cerebral hemisphere in this case, which is picking up radiation that comes from the radioxenon. And then here, when the circulation is then going through the vessels here, you start to get the pickup here and score so much. But if the brain is active and you're giving it restrictions to do, there's bigger circulation here and you get a larger count. So that is what you're doing. You're trying to investigate brain action or brain work during actions by getting the Geiger counter here recorded, and it goes through 254 channels, parallel processing, and eventually comes out as a color display of the cerebral cortex here. And I'll going to show you some displays, but not in color. Here's the cerebral cortex then, as you saw before, frontal lobe, and so on. And all of this is happening for the circulation and therefore the work that's being done by the brain under these conditions. And so the subject can now be given some task to do. You can take, of course, a run at rest. The subject is lying at rest, eyes and ears closed, and then operating on some trick or other. And in this particular first picture that I'll show you, he is just expecting a touch on his finger, this finger. The apparatus is there to give the touch on the finger on the contralateral side, and he is anticipating this. It's just sensitive. It's just a threshold. He has to concentrate intensely. How do you get off this thing? Intensely on the finger. And when you're doing that, you see, you're doing no movement, only just thinking, pure mental happenings on your finger. Then you get, next slide, here. This is the finger area, finger touch area of the cerebral cortex, sensory area. And you see there's 25% increase in circulation. There's a lot of brain work is going on here without you doing anything, moving or anything at all, just thinking. So thought does work on the brain. And there's also a bigger area in the mid prefrontal here and a little bit there. But this is all highly statistically significant. You can see it all here to the 0.305 level of the student t-test. This is highly statistically significant happening of increase in circulation showing the brain is working when you think. So thinking causes the brain to act. That's the main thing that we're working with. And not all the brain, but just in specific areas. And this is what we must do. All the time we're thinking. Supposing I want to move my little finger, my thumb here, using flexibility as long as just one muscle does this. When I'm thinking of that, I can do it and nothing else moves. So I'm able to think not only to work my brain, but to work my brain in very specific regions according to my desires. And this is what skills everything is, this brain, mind working on brain. And there is no explanation except my explanation of how this can occur. That's right. Well, that's a dualist explanation. The identity people are not explaining anything. And they don't argue about it either. Next slide, please. Now, here is now thinking again. You can have all kinds of fancy thinking. Here is just subtracting 3 from 50, lying there and doing... By the way, all of these are allowed for resting. You subtract the resting conditions from the active conditions. And so when you're just subtracting 3 from 50, you go on here and get all this wonderful increase in the prefrontal lobes mostly of circulation. You are bringing, how much are you doing? Well, you're bringing hundreds of millions of neurons into action to do this. A computer can do it, you know, with a few bits of chips. But we require hundreds of millions of neurons to even do a simple arithmetic sum. And then this is a jingle, listening to some tune and judging it. This is for the Danish people. And here is the route. You go out and you're just imagining what happens when you walk out your door, turn left, turn right, what you see, what you hear. And while you're doing that, and it takes, of course, 40 seconds for the count to run, you can see the enormous activity there. In rest, just thinking, this, doing nothing. His brain is working harder than my brain is working now, and that's quite a lot. Even see, the silent thinking is incredibly active, and this is the mind working upon the brain. So there's no question about mind-brain action. It's very effective. And the philosophers don't know anything about this. Next slide, please. And here is, again, you're now intending to do a special movement like this. A finger, I won't do the detail of this motor sequence testing. And there you can see when you're doing it, the subject is doing it. He's getting his motor cortex and premotor, sensory motor areas working. But there's also another area working. And this, when he's not doing anything, when he's lying there and just thinking of doing the movements and not doing anything, then up comes the supplementary motor area on both sides with a 20% or so increase in circulation. So just thinking of movements is enough to act the brain. Well, I've given you enough now that there's a real problem, and it is not, of course, very finely grained yet. We don't have the techniques, and so these are quite involving, you might say, tens of millions of neurons and of dendrons. A big dendron operation is fine, but they are working, and we know from our subtle testing that with better techniques we can refine it more and more. It's just that the techniques are not adequate to give the information about what the brain is subtly doing. We're able to fire off very little areas of the brain at will. Next slide. So I come back to dendrons. And here are the dendrons that I've drawn this myself before I saw the other pictures. And I have a transparency here about this by Peters, but there is no projector for it. Where?
There is one behind.